Black Hollow was a place shrouded in mystery, its dark canopy concealing secrets as old as time. The trees, gnarled and twisted, loomed like silent sentinels, their branches entwined to form a near impenetrable ceiling. The forest floor was thick with moss and creeping vines, muffling the sound of footsteps and giving the air an eerie stillness. No birds sang here, no animals stirred. It was as if life itself avoided this forsaken place. The stories told in Greymoor were enough to keep most villagers far away. Tales of strange lights flickering between the trees, of voices calling in the dead of night, and of shadows that moved on their own. They said the forest was alive, watching, waiting for the foolish or the curious to step too far into its depths. The curse of Black Hollow was older than memory, passed down through generations like a dark legacy. Some claimed it was the site of ancient rituals, where forbidden rites had summoned something from beyond the veil of this world. Others believed it was a battleground, soaked in the blood of countless souls who had never found peace. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Black Hollow was no ordinary forest. The few who returned spoke in hushed tones, their eyes hollow and distant. They would not speak of what they had seen, only that it had changed them. Their hair turned white overnight, their voices trembled with a fear they could not articulate, and they would never set foot near the forest again. Yet despite the warnings, there were always those who were drawn to the hollow, by curiosity, by desperation, or by something they could not explain. The forest called to them, its shadowy allure impossible to resist. And once they entered, Black Hollow would consume them, just as it had done to so many before. The curse of Black Hollow was born in fire and blood, its origins rooted in the desperate cries of the betrayed. Centuries ago, when Greymoor was but a fledgling village, whispers of dark rituals swept through the community. Livestock fell ill, crops withered, and the blame fell upon a small coven of women who lived on the forest's edge. The villagers, driven by fear and the words of a zealous priest, accused the women of witchcraft, convinced that they consorted with unholy forces. Dragged from their homes, the women were marched into the heart of the forest, where they were bound to stakes and set alight. As the flames licked their skin, the witches did not scream. Instead, they chanted, a guttural, unholy incantation that filled the air with dread. The villagers watched in horror as the sky darkened, the sun obscured by swirling clouds. The very ground beneath them seemed to pulse, as if the forest itself had awakened to the witches' dying words. By fire we perish, by shadow we rise. Let these woods bear our pain and wrath. Let those who enter be lost, and let their hearts tremble in fear. We bind our spirits to this soil, our vengeance eternal. When the last of the witches fell silent, the forest grew deathly still. The villagers fled, but none spoke of what they saw as they turned back toward the blazing stakes. The shadows cast by the fire twisted unnaturally, forming shapes, human-like, yet wrong, dancing between the trees as if celebrating their newfound dominion. From that day, Black Hollow became a place of dread. The villagers believed the witches' spirits lingered, bound to the forest, twisting it into a living nightmare. Paths that once led out of the woods now circled back on themselves. Travelers would hear whispers, soft and seductive, luring them deeper into the shadows. Lights flickered in the distance, like will-o'-the-wisps, guiding the unwary to their doom. The witch's curse didn't merely claim lives, it devoured souls. Those who vanished in the hollow were said to join the witch's spectral coven, their cries of anguish becoming part of the whispers that haunted the forest. Generations later, the villagers of Greymoor continued to avoid Black Hollow, the weight of the curse an unshakable burden on their collective memory. And yet, the forest seemed to thrive in its cursed state. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, their roots gnarled and sprawling as though feeding on the fear and despair of those who ventured too close. Black Hollow was no longer just a forest, it was a living monument to betrayal, vengeance, and the witches who had vowed to make the living suffer as they had. Even now, the whispers lingered, promising secrets to those bold or foolish enough to seek them. But the price of curiosity was steep. In Black Hollow, the lost did not return, not as they were. The legends of Black Hollow were as pervasive as the forest itself, carried from one generation to the next like warnings etched into the fabric of Greymoor's history. They painted a grim tapestry of a living forest, one that thrived on the fear and folly of the unwary. The glowing eyes were the most common tale, fiery orbs that hovered in the darkness, unblinking and malevolent, always watching. Some said they belonged to the witches themselves, their spirits bound to eternal vigilance. Others believed they were the souls of the forest's victims, cursed to haunt the trees forever. The voices were even more sinister. Carried on the wind, they called out in familiar tones, sometimes the soothing voice of a loved one, other times a desperate plea for help. Travelers would swear they heard their names whispered, as if the forest knew them, beckoning them deeper into its shadowed embrace. Those who followed the voices rarely returned, and those who did came back broken, their eyes hollow, their minds shattered by whatever horrors they had encountered. Then there was the laughter. Sharp, cruel, and echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. It would start faintly, like a breeze rustling the leaves, before swelling into a cacophony that filled the air. Some claimed it came from the witches, mocking those foolish enough to enter their domain. Others believed it was the forest itself, alive and sentient, reveling in its latest prey. Most disturbing of all were the faces. Travelers spoke of bark that twisted and groaned, forming grotesque visages frozen in expressions of agony and fury. These faces seemed to follow intruders, their hollow eyes burning with a silent rage. Some swore they heard faint cries emanating from the trees, as if the spirits of the cursed were trapped within the wood, their torment feeding the forest's insatiable hunger. Black Hollow's hunger was a recurring theme in every tale, its essence described as a living entity that thrived on fear, despair, and death. The forest didn't simply kill, it consumed. The souls of its victims were said to become part of its eternal darkness, their essence fueling its unnatural vitality. Every gnarled root, every twisted branch, bore the mark of those it had claimed, their suffering etched into the very fabric of the hollow. And so, the warnings persisted. Stay away from Black Hollow. Never enter its shadowed depths. For the forest was alive, and its hunger was eternal. Those who ventured in were not just trespassers, they were offerings. Lena and Sam stood at the edge of Black Hollow, the forest looming before them like a great, slumbering beast. The villagers had warned them, as they always did, to stay away. But Lena's curiosity burned brighter than her fear. The tales of the heart tree, a massive, ancient oak said to pulse with a dark energy, had fascinated her for years. It was rumored to be the source of the curse, the place where the witches had cast their final spell. If they could find it, perhaps they could uncover the truth, or even break the curse. Sam, the younger of the two, was less enthusiastic. He clutched the lantern tightly, its faint glow barely piercing the encroaching darkness. "Are you sure about this, Lena?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if the stories are true?" "That's why we're here," Lena said, holding up the hand-drawn map she'd borrowed from the village archives. "If we find the heart tree, we'll prove it one way or the other. Think of it, Sam. We'll be the first to see it, maybe even end the curse." Sam wasn't convinced, but he followed his sister anyway. The bond between them was unshakable, and though fear gnawed at his resolve, he couldn't let her go alone. As they stepped into the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The air was colder, heavier, and filled with a silence so complete it pressed against their ears. The trees towered over them, their twisted branches forming grotesque shapes in the fading light. The lantern's flickering glow seemed feeble against the oppressive darkness. They walked in silence, following the map's crude markings. It wasn't long before the first signs of the hollow's malevolence appeared. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, moving in ways that defied explanation. The whispers began soon after, soft, indistinct, but unmistakably there. Sam froze, his grip on the lantern tightening. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "It's just the wind," Lena replied, though her voice wavered. She refused to let fear take hold. "Keep moving." But the deeper they went, the louder the whispers grew. They weren't just sounds, they were words, murmured in a language neither sibling understood. The map grew harder to follow as the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches clawing at the sky. Finally, they reached a clearing. At its center stood the heart tree. It was enormous, its gnarled trunk blackened as if scorched, its branches sprawling like skeletal arms. The air around it pulsed with an unnatural energy, and the ground was littered with strange markings carved into the earth. "We found it," Lena breathed, awe and dread warring in her voice. Sam wasn't so sure. The whispers were louder here, almost deafening, and the shadows seemed to converge around the tree. "Lena, I don't think we should be here," he said, his voice trembling. Before she could reply, the lantern flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The whispers turned to laughter, high-pitched and cruel. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the tree's branches began to move, reaching toward them like living things. "Run!" Lena shouted, grabbing Sam's arm. But the forest had other plans. The shadows came alive, forming shapes that blocked their path. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the hollow as the siblings struggled to escape. The heart tree pulsed, its bark splitting to reveal a faint, red glow at its core. It was alive, its ancient, cursed power radiating through the clearing. And it was hungry. But the forest was not kind to trespassers. As the shadows deepened, the whispers began, soft at first, indistinct murmurs that seemed to blend with the rustling of leaves. Yet these sounds were unnatural, carrying an eerie cadence, as though 1,000 voices spoke in unison, just out of comprehension. The whispers seemed to come from all around, echoing between the trees, growing louder with every step. Sam's steps faltered, his breath quickening. He clutched Lena's sleeve tightly. "Lena, do you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the unnerving chorus. Lena stopped, her eyes scanning the darkened woods. She nodded, though she kept her voice steady. "It's just the wind, Sam," she said, though the unease in her tone betrayed her attempt to sound reassuring. "Keep moving. We're close." But Sam's eyes darted around, his grip on the lantern trembling. The whispers weren't just sounds now, they were forming words. He couldn't make out the meaning, but they were there, taunting, laced with malice. It felt as though the forest itself was speaking to them, warning them to leave. As they continued, the path became less defined, the trees pressing closer together. The air grew colder, each breath a visible puff in the dim light of the lantern. The whispers shifted, turning to faint laughter, childlike, yet hollow and cruel. Sam's pulse quickened, his feet dragging as dread rooted him in place. "Lena," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Something's not right. We should go back." Lena paused, her jaw tightening. The forest's oppressive energy was starting to seep into her, too, but she couldn't turn back, not now. "We're fine," she insisted, though her words felt hollow even to her. "Just stay close to me." The siblings pressed on, their lantern flickering as if the darkness itself were trying to snuff it out. The laughter faded, replaced by low groans that seemed to rise from the ground beneath their feet. Sam's every instinct screamed at him to run, but the pull of the heart tree, the cursed core of Black Hollow, drew them inexorably forward. Unseen eyes watched them from the shadows, and the whispers grew louder still, no longer echoing. Now they were clear, sharp, and unmistakable. They hissed, the words slithering through the air like a serpent's breath. For the first time, Lena's resolve wavered. She tightened her grip on the map, her knuckles white. "Sam," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Don't let go of me." Then they saw them, eyes. Dozens of them. Glowing faintly in the dark, their eerie light shifting between shades of green and yellow. They watched, unblinking, from the gaps between the ancient, gnarled trunks. The siblings froze in their tracks, the lantern in Sam's hand trembling, its light barely piercing the oppressive darkness. "Lena," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. His grip on the lantern tightened until his knuckles turned white. "I see them," Lena replied, her voice steady but strained. Her eyes darted from shadow to shadow, trying to count the watchers, but there were too many. The eyes seemed to multiply, moving subtly as if the darkness itself was alive, shifting to encircle them. The whispers returned, no longer indistinct but sharp and deliberate that the voices hissed. overlapping and weaving through the cold air. The words seemed to come from the trees themselves, carried by a wind that didn't stir the leaves. Lena took a step forward, her courage faltering as the eyes grew brighter. We're not here to hurt anyone," she stammered, though she wasn't sure who, or what, she was addressing. "We just want to see the heart tree." The laughter returned, harsh and mocking, echoing from every direction. The eyes began to move, slithering through the darkness like predators stalking their prey. The siblings could make out faint shapes now, humanoid figures, twisted and elongated, their limbs unnaturally long and thin. The shadows clung to them like cloaks, masking their full form but leaving no doubt that they were closing in. "Lena, we need to leave," Sam said, his voice shaking as his panic threatened to overwhelm him. He took a step back, his lantern shaking so violently that its weak light flickered dangerously. "We can't turn back now," Lena said, though her resolve was crumbling under the weight of their situation. Her eyes locked onto the map, but the markings made no sense anymore. The trees, the paths, even the forest itself seemed to shift, defying any sense of direction. The whispers grew louder, the glowing eyes closing in from all sides. Lena and Sam were surrounded. The lantern sputtered and dimmed, its light barely holding against the encroaching darkness. Then, a voice rose above the rest, low, resonant, and filled with malice. Before either sibling could react, the ground beneath them began to shift and crack, roots twisting and writhing as if the forest itself was alive. The trees loomed closer, their branches stretching downward like skeletal arms reaching for them. The shadows moved, coiling and undulating like living things, the forest itself seeming to close in around them. The towering trees bent inward, their gnarled branches reaching down like clawed hands. From the ground, roots surged upward, twisting like serpents, encircling Lena and Sam with a predatory grace. The air grew thick, each breath heavier than the last. It felt as though the forest was draining the life from them, replacing it with its own malevolent presence. The whispers grew deafening now, overlapping voices snarling, laughing, and hissing in a chaotic symphony. Sam gripped the lantern tighter, its flickering light the only thing standing between them and the consuming darkness. "Lena, it's going to go out," he cried, his voice strained with terror. "Hold it steady," Lena commanded, though her own hands trembled as she clutched the useless map. Her mind raced, desperate for a way out, but every direction was the same: darkness, shifting trees, and those unblinking eyes that watched from the shadows. The roots coiled tighter, some of them brushing against their ankles, their touch cold and damp. The ground beneath them shuddered, and a deep, guttural groan resonated through the forest, as though the very earth was alive and angry. Then, with a final sputter, the lantern's flame died, plunging them into complete darkness. "Lena!" Sam screamed, his voice swallowed by the oppressive black. He reached out blindly, his hands finding hers as they clung to each other. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an unsettling silence that was somehow worse. And then, from deep within the forest, a light appeared. It was faint, pulsating like a heartbeat, casting an unnatural glow that illuminated the tangled roots and twisted trunks around them. It came from ahead, where the forest seemed to part slightly, as though beckoning them forward. "The heart tree," Lena whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. Sam shook his head violently. "No. We have to get out of here." "This isn't right, Lena, this is a trap." But Lena's gaze was fixed on the light, her body pulling toward it as if under a spell. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." The light pulsed again, brighter this time, revealing the faint outline of an enormous tree in the distance. Its trunk was impossibly wide, its branches stretching high into the darkness, and its roots seemed to pulse with the same eerie glow. As the siblings hesitated, the roots around them tightened, their intentions clear. The forest wasn't going to let them leave, not until it had what it wanted. And then, from deep within the forest, a light appeared. It was faint, pulsating like a heartbeat, casting an unnatural glow that illuminated the tangled roots and twisted trunks around them. It came from ahead, where the forest seemed to part slightly, as though beckoning them forward. "The heart tree," Lena whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. Sam shook his head violently. "No. We have to get out of here. This isn't right, Lena, this is a trap." But Lena's gaze was fixed on the light, her body pulling toward it as if under a spell. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." The light pulsed again, brighter this time, revealing the faint outline of an enormous tree in the distance. Its trunk was impossibly wide, its branches stretching high into the darkness, and its roots seemed to pulse with the same eerie glow. As the siblings hesitated, the roots around them tightened, their intentions clear. The forest wasn't going to let them leave, not until it had what it wanted. But Lena's gaze was fixed on the light, her body pulling toward it as if under a spell. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." The light pulsed again, brighter this time, revealing the faint outline of an enormous tree in the distance. Its trunk was impossibly wide, its branches stretching high into the darkness, and its roots seemed to pulse with the same eerie glow. As the siblings hesitated, the roots around them tightened, their intentions clear. The forest wasn't going to let them leave, not until it had what it wanted. In the heart of the city stood the Grand Lyric Theater, a beacon of art and enchantment that had captured the imagination of generations. Its facade was a masterpiece, adorned with intricate carvings and grand archways that beckoned visitors into its opulent halls. The chandeliers sparkled like captured starlight, and the crimson velvet seats held the weight of countless memories. On its stage, dreams were born, and reality was suspended. But beneath the theater's grandeur lay a darker tale, whispered only in hushed tones. The staff spoke of strange occurrences, a faint humming heard in empty corridors, the distant echo of applause in an empty auditorium, and cold spots that lingered without explanation. Stagehands swore they felt unseen eyes watching as they worked late into the night. They called it the Phantom of the Lyric, though no one truly knew what, or who, it was. Some said it was the spirit of a former actor, one whose love for the stage was so profound that not even death could pull him away. Others spoke of an accident long buried in the theater's history, an untimely demise hidden behind the allure of its glittering reputation. The rumors persisted, growing darker with each passing year. Audiences marveled at the magic on stage, unaware of the real magic, the eerie, unexplained life that thrived in the shadows. For when the curtain fell and the lights dimmed, the Grand Lyric Theater revealed its true self, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thinner than anyone dared imagine. The theater had a reputation for more than its performances. Actors spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences that plagued the backstage area. Costumes that were meticulously hung in the dressing rooms would mysteriously find themselves scattered across the floor by morning. Props, carefully arranged and set in place, would be moved without explanation, sometimes appearing on opposite sides of the stage, as if guided by invisible hands. The unsettling presence was always there, a constant weight in the air, a feeling of being watched that no one could shake. They blamed the phantom, but not of the opera. This figure, a shadow that moved unseen through the backstage corridors, was something different. His presence was felt, not seen, but there were those who claimed to have glimpsed his form, a tall, dark silhouette, fading into the edges of the room just as their eyes tried to focus. His footsteps echoed through the halls late at night, when the rest of the city was asleep, and whispers followed them as they left the stage, murmuring words that could never be fully understood. No one knew exactly who, or what, the phantom was. Some believed he was the restless spirit of an actor long forgotten, someone whose career was cut short under tragic circumstances. Others thought he might be the vengeful ghost of a forgotten understudy, one whose dreams of stardom had been crushed by betrayal or neglect. No one knew for sure, and as the years went by, the stories grew darker, more twisted, as if the phantom's motives were just as mysterious as the shadows he inhabited. Some actors, eager to prove their bravery, would venture into the dark, labyrinthine hallways after hours, hoping to confront the elusive figure. But few ever came back with a clear account of their encounter. Some spoke of a cold presence that brushed against them in the dark, others of a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread that paralyzed them where they stood. And then there were those who said they had heard his voice, a low, guttural whisper that chilled them to the bone. Some said he was a stagehand who met a tragic end during a performance decades ago. The story went that he had been working late one fateful evening, preparing the set for a grand production. In his haste, he'd climbed to the rigging to adjust a light, only for the unthinkable to happen. The equipment malfunctioned, and he fell to his death, the crowd oblivious to the accident that took place far above them. They said his spirit never left, trapped in the space between the stage and the audience, cursed to haunt the place of his untimely demise. Others believed he was an actor, desperate for fame, who paid the ultimate price for his ambition. Legend spoke of a young performer who, consumed by his desire to be the star of the theater, had made a deal, an unholy pact with forces beyond the mortal realm. His name had never been spoken aloud, but whispers said he was granted the fame he so craved, rising to the top in the theater world. But the price was steep. His soul was claimed, and though his performances dazzled, they came at the cost of his very humanity. When the lights dimmed and the applause stopped, he was left a hollow figure, wandering the theater as a shadow, his fame now a twisted memory. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: he was still here, lurking in the corners of the theater, watching from behind the curtain. On opening nights, when the excitement of the audience reached its peak, the atmosphere in the theater would shift. A heavy silence would fall over the cast and crew, an inexplicable tension that no one could shake. As if on cue, the dimly lit corners of the stage would seem to darken further, and the air would grow thick with an unsettling chill. Sometimes, when the final act approached, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps would echo through the backstage area, though no one was there. And in the dressing rooms, when the actors would change, they would feel it, a soft breath on their neck, a fleeting touch on their shoulder, a presence so close, yet so far from reach. They all knew he was there, just beyond the stage lights, just behind the curtain, waiting. Watching. His motives unclear, his presence undeniable, and his thirst for attention never fully quenched. When newcomer Clara joined the cast of The Silent Serenade, she had heard the rumors, of course, the whispered tales of the phantom, the ghostly figure that haunted the theater's backstage. To her, it all sounded like theater lore, designed to spook rookies and keep the seasoned actors entertained. She was determined not to let such stories get to her. After all, she had come to the Grand Lyric Theater with dreams of making her mark, and nothing, certainly not ghost stories, would stand in her way. On her first night alone in the dressing room, Clara's resolve began to crack. The theater had emptied after the evening's performance, the final applause still echoing in her mind. She was alone, just finishing up her makeup as she prepared to leave. The room was quiet, too quiet. The usual hustle and bustle of backstage had faded, leaving behind an eerie stillness that seemed to fill every corner. As she packed her things, the lights above flickered once, then twice, before settling into a steady hum. Clara glanced up, brushing it off as a simple electrical glitch. But then came the sound, soft at first, like a breath on the wind. She froze. It wasn't the rustling of fabric or the sound of footsteps from the hallway. It was something else, something wrong. She turned, expecting to see one of the other actors, but the room was empty. Her heart began to race as she turned back to her reflection in the mirror. A chill brushed her skin, cold and unnatural. She had been taught to ignore the things that didn't make sense, but the air in the room felt thick, heavy, as though something was pressing in from all sides. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Clara saw it, a shadow. It moved across the wall, just behind her. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a shifting form cast by the overhead bulbs. But when she turned to face the shadow, it vanished, leaving the room as still as before. The door to the dressing room creaked open, and Clara jumped, her breath catching in her throat. But there was no one there. A voice, soft and distant, whispered from the shadows, a raspy sound that barely reached her ears. "I'm watching, Clara." Her skin crawled as the words reverberated in her chest. She had heard of the phantom, the figure who haunted the theater, but she had never truly believed it. Now, standing in that quiet room, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on her, Clara wasn't so sure. The temperature in the room plummeted, the once stale air now biting against her skin. She grabbed her things, panic setting in. But as she reached for the door, the lights flickered one last time and went out completely. In the sudden darkness, Clara heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward her, but no one was there. A voice, faint, but growing stronger, whispered in her ear again, "I'm always here, waiting." Clara could feel the presence now, pressing down on her, and she knew, without a doubt, that the stories were true. The phantom was real. And he was watching her. The Grand Lyric Theatre was renowned for its performances, lavish productions that dazzled the eyes and captured the hearts of audiences night after night. The stage was alive with color, movement, and sound, drawing theatergoers into worlds they could only dream of. But the true drama, the kind that never made it into the spotlight, unfolded in the shadows, behind the curtain, where no one could see. Backstage was a world of its own, a labyrinth of narrow hallways, forgotten rooms, and the lingering scent of old velvet and paint. For the actors and crew, it was where the real work happened, where the magic was born. But over the years, whispers began to circulate about what lay beneath the surface of this grand place. There were those who claimed the theater was cursed, a place where the lines between the living and the dead blurred in the darkness. Actors who stayed too long, they said, would hear the footsteps of someone, or something, following them down the hallways when no one else was there. Crew members swore they had seen shadows move of their own accord, flickering across the walls, and felt cold, unseen hands brush their skin when they were alone in the wings. And the more curious among them, those who dared to dig deeper into the theater's past, often found themselves drawn into the web of its secrets, secrets that would change them forever. Lena, the young understudy, was one of those who couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. Late one night, after the final curtain had fallen and the theater emptied out, she stayed behind to rehearse. The quiet, once comforting, now felt suffocating. As she passed through the backstage corridors, a strange sensation began to creep over her, a growing sense of being watched, though no one was there. The air grew thick, and the lights overhead flickered ominously. She thought she heard faint whispers coming from one of the dressing rooms, but when she turned the corner, there was no one in sight. It wasn't until she reached the old, forgotten prop room at the end of the hall that she felt it, an undeniable pull. Something inside her urged her to step in, to uncover what lay hidden there. As she opened the door, a cold draft swept past her, carrying with it the faintest trace of perfume, a scent she recognized, though she couldn't quite place it. The room was dark, filled with old costumes, masks, and props from long-forgotten performances. But it was also filled with something else, a sense of waiting. Before she could step further inside, a voice, barely audible, whispered from the shadows. "Welcome to the next act, Lena." The words froze her in place. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening crash. The lights flickered again, and this time, they didn't return to their usual brightness. Instead, the room seemed to grow darker, colder, as if the shadows themselves had come alive. From the farthest corner of the room, a figure began to materialize, a tall, gaunt figure, its features twisted and worn with age, its eyes empty pits of darkness. "The theater always gets what it wants," the figure said, its voice echoing through the room. "And tonight, Lena, it's you." The air around her thickened, the walls seeming to close in as if the theater itself were claiming her, pulling her into its dark, eternal performance. The last thing Lena saw was the flickering stage lights through the small window, and then, nothing. The next night, the show went on as usual. The audience clapped, unaware of the dark forces that stirred in the unseen corners of the theater. But backstage, the phantom waited, watching for the next unsuspecting soul to cross the threshold. And Lena, like so many before her, had become part of the Grand Lyric Theatre's never-ending act, her soul trapped within its walls, forever waiting for the next opening night. The dressing room was quiet, the only sound the soft shuffle of Lena's footsteps as she paced back and forth, preparing for her scene. She had been rehearsing for hours, her mind running through the lines, but something felt off, like the air had thickened, pressing in on her from all sides. She paused for a moment, glancing into the mirror in front of her, trying to calm her nerves. The reflection staring back at her was familiar, but as she looked closer, she noticed something strange. The mirror began to fog, the glass clouding over despite the fact that the room was still, the air warm and dry. She wiped at the surface, but it only grew worse, as though a layer of moisture had formed from within. And then, as if guided by an unseen hand, letters began to appear, etched across the surface of the fog. Slowly at first, the strokes seemed to carve themselves into the glass, leaving behind an eerie, almost glowing trail. Each letter seemed deliberate, forming words she couldn't yet comprehend. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest as the letters grew clearer. Dot was the first phrase, scrawled hastily across the fog. Her pulse quickened. She turned, looking for anyone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. The room was empty, the lights flickering slightly overhead. No one else was there. She wiped at the mirror again, her hands trembling, but the words remained, as if taunting her, mocking her attempts to erase them. The fog spread further, covering more of the surface. More words followed. Lena's mind raced. She didn't know what it meant, but the cold chill that crept through her veins told her it was something she couldn't ignore. Her past, her mistakes, had caught up with her, and somehow, the theater was a part of it. A part of something bigger, something darker. She stepped back from the mirror, her mind swirling with confusion and dread. Then the final message appeared, written slowly, deliberately, as though the hand guiding it wanted her to see it clearly. A cold wind swept through the room, despite the stillness, and the lights flickered violently before plunging the dressing room into darkness. Lena gasped, her breath shallow as she stood frozen, the words now burned into her mind. In the silence that followed, Lena could almost hear something else, a soft, far-off whisper that seemed to come from behind the mirror, a voice that lingered in the air, too faint to understand but too real to ignore. The mirror, now clear again, reflected only her own face. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was staring back at her, something watching, waiting. Backstage was a world of its own, a labyrinth of narrow hallways, forgotten rooms, and the lingering scent of old velvet and paint. For the actors and crew, it was where the real work happened, where the magic was born. But over the years, whispers began to circulate about what lay beneath the surface of this grand place. There were those who claimed the theater was cursed, a place where the lines between the living and the dead blurred in the darkness. Actors who stayed too long, they said, would hear the footsteps of someone, or something, following them down the hallways when no one else was there. Crew members swore they had seen shadows move of their own accord, flickering across the walls, and felt cold, unseen hands brush their skin when they were alone in the wings. And the more curious among them, those who dared to dig deeper into the theater's past, often found themselves drawn into the web of its secrets that would change them forever. Lena, the young understudy, was one of those who couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. Late one night, after the final curtain had fallen and the theater emptied out, she stayed behind to rehearse. The quiet, once comforting, now felt suffocating. As she passed through the backstage corridors, a strange sensation began to creep over her, a growing sense of being watched, though no one was there. The air grew thick, and the lights overhead flickered ominously. She thought she heard faint whispers coming from one of the dressing rooms, but when she turned the corner, there was no one in sight. It wasn't until she reached the old, forgotten prop room at the end of the hall that she felt it, an undeniable pull. Something inside her urged her to step in, to uncover what lay hidden there. As she opened the door, a cold draft swept past her, carrying with it the faintest trace of perfume, a scent she recognized, though she couldn't quite place it. The room was dark, filled with old costumes, masks, and props from long-forgotten performances. But it was also filled with something else, a sense of waiting. Before she could step further inside, a voice, barely audible, whispered from the shadows. "Welcome to the next act, Lena." The words froze her in place. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening crash. The lights flickered again, and this time, they didn't return to their usual brightness. Instead, the room seemed to grow darker, colder, as if the shadows themselves had come alive. From the farthest corner of the room, a figure began to materialize. A tall, gaunt figure, its features twisted and worn with age, its eyes empty pits of darkness. "The theater always gets what it wants," the figure said, its voice echoing through the room. "And tonight, Lena, it's you." The air around her thickened, the walls seeming to close in as if the theater itself were claiming her, pulling her into its dark, eternal performance. The last thing Lena saw was the flickering stage lights through the small window, and then, nothing. The next night, the show went on as usual. The audience clapped, unaware of the dark forces that stirred in the unseen corners of the theater. But backstage, the Phantom waited, watching for the next unsuspecting soul to cross the threshold. And Lena, like so many before her, had become part of the Grand Lyric Theater's never-ending act, her soul trapped within its walls, forever waiting for the next opening night. The dressing room was quiet, the only sound the soft shuffle of Lena's footsteps as she paced back and forth, preparing for her scene. She had been rehearsing for hours, her mind running through the lines, but something felt off, like the air had thickened, pressing in on her from all sides. She paused for a moment, glancing into the mirror in front of her, trying to calm her nerves. The stranger's mask remained as still as ever, but his eyes, hidden beneath the smooth porcelain, seemed to burn through the space between them, an intensity in them that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. She could feel her breath shallow, a mix of fear and fascination building within her. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until he finally spoke again, his voice a low murmur that seemed to carry across the distance between them. "You've seen it now," he said, the words like an incantation. "And there is no turning back." Eleanor's throat went dry, the weight of his words settling into her chest like a stone. She wanted to speak, to demand what he meant, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Instead, her gaze fell to the archway once again, a strange pull urging her forward, and she felt a deep ache inside her, the need to know what lay beyond. Without realizing it, her feet began to move toward it, each step feeling like it was not entirely her own. Her legs were like they were being guided by something else, an invisible force that wrapped around her and kept her from turning back. The stranger didn't stop her, only watched, his mask hiding any emotion, his presence like a shadow she couldn't escape. As she neared the archway, the world around her began to change. The forest seemed to breathe, the trees swaying as if alive, whispering secrets she could not hear. The air grew thick, and the darkness in the clearing deepened, wrapping around her like a shroud. Eleanor's heart raced, but still, her feet carried her forward, a sense of inevitability hanging over her. And then, just as her hand brushed against the cold stone of the arch, the world seemed to crack open. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and an overwhelming sensation of vertigo hit her. It felt as though the fabric of reality was unraveling, the edges of the world blurring and warping. Time itself seemed to stretch and twist, and she couldn't make sense of the shifting, distorted images that flashed before her eyes. For a brief moment, Eleanor felt as if she were floating, as if she were no longer tied to this world, and then, suddenly, it all stopped. The sensation of vertigo disappeared. The air grew still, and when she opened her eyes, she was no longer standing in the clearing, but in a place that felt both familiar and completely alien. The landscape stretched before her, an endless horizon of rolling hills under a sky that seemed too dark, too vivid, as if the stars themselves were watching her. And there, standing at the center of it all, was the masked stranger. He had no form, no distinct shape, only the mask, its pale, empty face staring directly at her as though waiting. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she took in her surroundings. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and yet, it felt alive, humming with an energy she couldn't comprehend. The ground beneath her felt soft, like it was made of something otherworldly. And then, the voice of the stranger broke the silence, not with words, but with a thought that echoed in her mind, reverberating through her consciousness. "Do you understand now?" Eleanor's breath caught. She wasn't sure if she understood, but she knew she was no longer in the world she had known. Whatever this place was, it was bound to her now. And she realized, with a chilling certainty, that she might never leave. The stranger stepped closer, his form shifting in the darkness, and then, without a word, he offered her something, a key, crafted from the same strange material as the mask, glowing faintly in the dim light. Eleanor felt an unshakable chill creep up her spine as the stranger's gaze seemed to penetrate her very soul. His eyes, hidden beneath the mask, gave nothing away, but she could feel their weight, like they were silently dissecting every thought and feeling she had ever experienced. The silence stretched longer than it should have, and Eleanor fought the urge to flee. Something told her that running wouldn't save her, that she had already crossed a point of no return. The stranger's head tilted slightly to the side, and the silence was broken by the faintest of sighs, as if he were disappointed by her lack of understanding. Then, his voice, low and chilling, finally filled the air again. "You don't remember, do you?" he asked, as if the answer should have been obvious to her. "Remember what?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, fear curling in her chest like a tightening knot. The stranger took a step closer, his cloak billowing around him, creating an almost suffocating presence. The night seemed to grow colder with each movement, the air thickening with the weight of unspoken truths. He reached out, slowly, as though testing the air between them, before touching the edge of his mask with a finger. "It's all here, Eleanor," he said softly. "This town, this curse, it all leads to you." Eleanor's breath hitched. "What do you mean? What curse?" The stranger's smile remained fixed, but there was a glint of something darker in the mask's eyes, something ancient. "The mask knows you, and you know it. You always have. You've been part of this story from the beginning." Eleanor's mind raced, struggling to make sense of the stranger's cryptic words. Memories fluttered at the edges of her mind, fragments of forgotten dreams and half-remembered feelings that she couldn't quite piece together. The town, the strange whispers in the wind, the oppressive weight that had always hung over her, it was all tied to this man, this figure who seemed to embody the very darkness she had tried to ignore. "You're lying," she said, her voice shaking, but she wasn't so sure anymore. Something deep within her was beginning to stir, a truth she hadn't been able to grasp until now. The stranger's gaze softened, though the coldness never left his voice. "Am I?" "You felt it, haven't you? The pull, the way you've always been drawn to this town, to this moment. There is no escaping it. Not for you." Eleanor took a step back, the weight of his words pressing on her chest like a vice. "No. I don't believe you," she whispered, though even she wasn't sure if she believed herself. The stranger let out a soft, unsettling chuckle. "You will. In time. When the mask speaks to you, you'll understand everything." Before Eleanor could respond, he took another step back, his form beginning to blur, dissolving into the shadows like smoke in the wind. The mask's smile lingered a moment longer before he vanished completely, leaving her alone in the chilling silence of the night. Eleanor stood frozen, her breath heavy in her chest. She felt the air grow colder still, and as if summoned by the stranger's words, the wind picked up again, carrying with it an unmistakable scent, the same strange, metallic tang that had been present in her dreams. Her heart raced, and despite the fear coursing through her veins, she felt herself drawn toward the stranger didn't answer immediately. For a long moment, he remained motionless, his back to Eleanor, as if contemplating her question. The air around them seemed to grow even colder, the shadows of the night deepening. Eleanor could feel the weight of his silence pressing on her, and her words hung in the air, unanswered. Finally, he turned slightly, just enough for Eleanor to see the mask's smooth, featureless surface, and then he spoke, his voice low and almost sorrowful. "What I want," he paused, as if the very idea of it pained him. "What I want is not something I can give you. Not in the way you think." Eleanor's heart raced. "Then what do you mean? What do you want from us? Why have you come here?" The stranger's mask tilted as if considering her carefully. "I am the last of a long line," he said, his tone distant, as if lost in thought. "A keeper of memories, of things long forgotten. I've watched this town for generations, seen its secrets unfold, and its curses take root. The mask binds me to it, to you, to everyone who has ever walked these streets. Eleanor felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The mask. What does it have to do with me? What do I have to do with all this? The stranger's smile deepened, but it didn't reach the empty darkness of his eyes. You're part of this town's story, Eleanor. You always have been. The mask, it was meant for you. You are its keeper now, whether you realize it or not. Whether you like it or not. Eleanor took a step back, her mind reeling. Keeper of the mask? What does that even mean? The stranger stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, the cold around him seeming to intensify. The mask holds the town's truth, its curse, its fate. Whoever wears it becomes the town's guardian, the one who can either break the cycle or ensure it continues. But you've already chosen. Without even knowing it. Eleanor's stomach twisted. I haven't chosen anything. I don't even know what you're talking about. Ah, the stranger said softly, almost sympathetically, but you have. And now you can't undo it. The wind picked up again, swirling around them, carrying the scent of earth and decay. The stranger's cloak rippled in the gust, and for a moment, Eleanor thought she saw the briefest flash of something beneath the mask, something darker, something far older than she could comprehend. You will wear it, the stranger said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. And when the time comes, you will understand. Eleanor shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. No. I don't want any part of this. I don't want the mask. I don't want your curse. The stranger's smile never faltered. You never had a choice. The mask is waiting for you, Eleanor. It always has been. With that, he turned and began to walk away once more, his cloak trailing like a dark memory, leaving Eleanor alone with the weight of his words. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she watched him disappear into the shadows, her mind spinning. The air felt suffocating, the silence deafening, and the town, once so familiar, now felt alien, haunted by something she couldn't quite understand. But one thing was clear, her life, her fate, had been tied to this town and its mask long before she had ever arrived. And now, there was no turning back. Eleanor's mind raced as she walked quickly through the quiet streets of Thornhill, her thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. The stranger's words echoed in her head, I only wish to watch. It didn't make sense. Why had he singled her out? Why her, of all people? As she reached the safety of her home, Eleanor locked the door behind her with shaking hands. The house felt too quiet, too still. She paced the floors, trying to convince herself it was just a strange encounter, something she could forget. But she knew, deep down, that it was far from over. The stranger had been watching her, following her, and now, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with her yet. She glanced out of the window, half expecting to see him standing there, watching her from the shadows. But the street was empty. The town seemed so peaceful, so normal, yet Eleanor couldn't help but feel as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She tried to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting back to the mask, to the strange words of the stranger. The mask was meant for her. She was its keeper. The thought alone was enough to make her stomach turn. What did that even mean? What did he want with her, with this town? As the hours passed, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something much larger than herself. She had to know more, there had to be answers somewhere. Something about the stranger, his mask, and his cryptic words didn't sit right. In the silence of the night, Eleanor made a decision. She wasn't going to sit idly by, waiting for whatever was coming. She had to find out the truth about Thornhill, about the curse, and most importantly, about the mask. Tomorrow, she would go back to the town's library, dig through old records, old stories. There had to be something hidden, something that could explain what was happening to her. But as she lay down to sleep, the weight of the stranger's words lingered. I only wish to watch. And Eleanor couldn't shake the thought that she was being watched right now, even as she closed her eyes. Eleanor's sense of isolation deepened as the days wore on. The strange occurrences continued, each more unsettling than the last. One morning, she woke to find her front door slightly ajar, though she was certain she had locked it the night before. Another day, a flower pot she had placed carefully on her windowsill was found shattered on the ground, the flowers scattered in a pattern that almost seemed deliberate. The whispers in the wind grew more distinct, too, and each time Eleanor ventured outside, she could swear someone, or something, was watching her from the corners of her vision. The wind would carry faint voices, calling her name in a tone that sent a chill crawling down her spine. She tried to ignore it, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stranger's mask, that expressionless smile that never reached his eyes. Despite her growing unease, Eleanor continued her research, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. But each trip to the library brought her no closer to the truth. The old records were sparse, filled with vague references to mysterious happenings in Thornhill's past, but no concrete answers. It was as if the town was a place built on secrets, where the past had been buried beneath layers of silence. One afternoon, while walking through the market, Eleanor noticed a subtle shift in the townspeople's behavior. Their eyes followed her, but not in a way that felt welcoming or curious. No, there was something more in their gazes, something like fear. It was as though they were all waiting for something, and that something had something to do with her. Her stomach churned with a mix of dread and frustration. She couldn't stand feeling like a stranger in her own home, constantly on edge, constantly aware of invisible eyes watching her every move. She had to confront this. She couldn't keep living in fear. But the next time she attempted to ask someone about the masked stranger, the answer she received was not one she expected. "I don't think you should be asking about him, miss," an older woman at the market warned her, her voice trembling as she handed over a loaf of bread. "Some things are better left alone. People in Thornhill don't ask questions about him." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. "Who is he? Why does he come here?" The woman's face paled, and she hurriedly ushered Eleanor away from the market stand. "You'll see for yourself soon enough. Just, be careful. Not everyone gets to leave Thornhill once he's decided they belong." The cryptic words echoed in Eleanor's mind long after she left the market. What did the townspeople know? And why wouldn't they speak? She couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. It was as if she had stumbled onto something much darker than she could have ever imagined, and now, there was no turning back. Eleanor's breath hitched, but she didn't stop. This time, she walked toward him with purpose, her footsteps steady and resolute. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was focused on one goal: to understand, to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The stranger didn't move as she approached, his figure standing unerringly still, like a shadow stitched into the fabric of the night. When she was only a few feet away, he tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging her presence but waiting for her to speak first. "I need answers," Eleanor said, her voice shaking but firm. "Why are you here? What do you want from me? Why are you haunting this town?" The stranger remained silent for a moment, and Eleanor's anxiety grew. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees nearby, but there was no other sound, no answer. She couldn't take the silence anymore. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tell me." Finally, the stranger spoke, his voice smooth and cold, like a whisper through ice. "Not everyone comes here by choice," he said softly, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Some are drawn by fate. Others, by something far older." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Fate? What do you mean? Why me? Why this town?" His lips curved into a smile, though the expression was empty, void of any warmth. "You think you've come here by accident? That this place is just a stop in your journey? But it's never that simple. Thornhill has a way of keeping people bound. You're here now, and you'll understand soon enough." Eleanor shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. "Bound? What do you mean? What is Thornhill? What's happening to me?" The stranger took a slow step closer, his figure almost blending with the shadows around him. "Thornhill is not just a town. It's a place where stories are written in blood and silence. It's where time bends and where people become part of the fabric of this place. Eleanor felt her knees tremble, the weight of his words crashing over her. But I didn't choose this. I don't want to be a part of whatever this is. The stranger's smile deepened, and for the first time, Eleanor thought she saw something almost sympathetic in his eyes. That's the thing about fate, my dear. You don't get to choose. And once you're woven into the story, you're in it. Forever. A chill ran down her spine, and she stumbled back, panic creeping in. No. I can't be part of this. I won't. But before she could take another step, the stranger raised a hand, and the air around her grew colder, heavier. It's already too late. The ground beneath Eleanor seemed to shift, as if the very town was responding to the stranger's words. The buildings around her seemed to lean in, their windows dark and lifeless. The quiet streets suddenly felt suffocating, the shadows stretching unnaturally long, as if the town itself were alive. The stranger took a final step forward, his voice now an eerie murmur. Welcome to Thornhill. You're home now. And in that moment, Eleanor realized the terrible truth. She had never truly been a visitor in Thornhill. She had always belonged here. And now, there was no way out. His lips curved into a smile, though the expression was empty, void of any warmth. You think you've come here by accident. That this place is just a stop in your journey. But it's never that simple. Thornhill has a way of keeping people bound. You're here now, and you'll understand soon enough. Eleanor shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. Bound? What do you mean? What is Thornhill? What's happening to me? The stranger took a slow step closer, his figure almost blending with the shadows around him. Thornhill is not just a town. It's a place where stories are written in blood and silence. It's where time bends and where people become part of the fabric of this place. Eleanor felt her knees tremble, the weight of his words crashing over her. But I didn't choose this. I don't want to be a part of whatever this is. The stranger's smile deepened, and for the first time, Eleanor thought she saw something almost sympathetic in his eyes. That's the thing about fate, my dear. You don't get to choose. And once you're woven into the story, you're in it. Forever. A chill ran down her spine, and she stumbled back, panic creeping in. No. I can't be part of this. I won't.